I think it's time I tackle the most divisive movie after Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight trilogy. The Dark Knight Rises seems to get both a lot of things right and a lot of things wrong. So in this video, I'm going to give my thoughts on this movie. So let's start with some positives. First off is the film's epic scale. The Dark Knight Rises is by far the grandest in terms of set pieces and spectacle of the three movies in the trilogy. Many describe Batman Begins as an origin story, The Dark Knight as a crime thriller, and The Dark Knight Rises as a war movie, and I do agree with that sentiment. Rises, in some way, feels the most superheroic of the three movies, with the stakes being higher than ever, and whilst the trope of superhero movies having big stakes has certainly been overdone, it works as an excellent finishing act for this version of the Batman character. By having the stakes so high, it allows Batman to truly become the hero that Gotham deserves and the one that it also needs, which resolves the underlying dilemma that Batman is faced with at the end of The Dark Knight. That being by taking the fall for Harvey Dent's death and concealing what the Joker had done to Gotham's White Knight, Batman was no longer a symbol of hope for the people of Gotham, and without Harvey Dent and without Batman, Gotham no longer had a symbol of hope in the present moment. Gotham needed a hero, and Rises, arguably more so than the other two movies, makes Batman at his most heroic in the trilogy. The spectacle of this film is also something that I deeply admire. Whilst much of the fight choreography unfortunately leaves much to be desired, some of the other action set pieces in the film are truly spectacular, such as the opening plane sequence with Bane, as well as the bike chase in which Batman returns to Gotham, and of course the truck bomb chase in the final act of the movie. This film feels grand in scale, and what enhances that is Nolan's continual persistence in using practical effects over CGI wherever possible. The riot scene in the final act with the GCPD face off against Gotham's criminals feels absolutely spectacular to watch because it's shot for real, and that really enhances the feeling you get watching this movie. On the note of spectacle, I would also argue that Rises is the prettiest of the three films cinematographically, with beautiful shots like this, and this, and this. And Batman in particular is shot very well, with shots of him with his cape flapping in the wind, feeling like the comic books brought straight to the big screen, which is always a pleasure to see. On the note of Batman, I have mixed feelings on the direction of the character in this film. In some ways, this movie understands Batman perfectly, understanding one of the most inspiring traits of the character, this being Batman's endless determination to never give up, and this is showcased brilliantly through his sequences in the pit during the second act of the movie. We really get a sense of how much he cares about saving his city and what he's willing to overcome to do so. To me, one of Batman's greatest superpowers is his ability to never give up. He never truly fails, in a sense. Everything bad he faces is a temporary setback that he overcomes, and by having a plot that really takes Batman to his absolute lowest, having lost Rachel, having had all of his money stolen from him, having had Alfred abandon him, and finally having his back broken and his city being held hostage by Bane, we see him struggle to fight his way back into being the hero that Gotham needs him to be. And it's such an inspiring journey to watch. And in that sense, this feels very on point for Batman as a character. However, where the film picks up at the start, the direction of Batman almost contradicts this very idea. We see a retired Batman. Bruce had left the Batman mantle behind and has been a shut-in at Wayne Manor for the past 8 years. At the end of The Dark Knight, the impression I took from Batman's last speech is that despite living long enough to be seen as the villain, he was going to keep on being Batman despite this.
You can't. You're not. I'm whatever Gotham needs me to be. Call it in. I'll hunt you. You'll hunt me. You'll condemn me. Set the dogs on me. Because that's what needs to happen. Because sometimes truth isn't good enough. Sometimes people deserve more. Sometimes people deserve to have their faith rewarded.
Because we have to chase him.
Okay, we're going in. Go, go, move.
You didn't do anything wrong.
Because it's the hero Gotham deserves. But not the one it needs right now. So we'll hunt him. Because he can take it.
Whereas Rises showcases a Batman who's given up at the start. His city doesn't need saving, and by slacking off being Batman, he doesn't give the impression of someone willing to do anything to protect Gotham. Bruce is apathetic at the start of the movie, and whilst this does indeed make logical sense following the loss of Rachel, it's a character arc that doesn't really fit all too well with the character, in my opinion. It's commonly discussed that Batman is the real identity and Bruce Wayne is the mask. This notion is even discussed in Batman Begins by Rachel.
Batman's just a simple Rachel.
No, this is your mask. Your real face is the one that criminals now fear.
Rachel represents the Bruce Wayne side of the character, not the Batman one. And whilst losing Rachel is a devastating moment to Bruce, but as Batman is who he truly is, for me it seems hard to believe that he'd give up being Batman after her death. If anything, it would make sense that he was out doing more Batman stuff out of the guilt that he wasn't able to save her. This, in my opinion, would also enhance the subplot of Batman struggling to find the will to live.
Up your cape and your cow, but you didn't move on. You never went to find a life, to find someone.
Alfred, I did find someone.
I know, and you lost them, but that's all part of living, sir. But you're not living. You're just waiting, hoping for things to go bad again.
Bruce would be actively risking his life more than ever because he'd want to go out saving his city, not aging away in isolation in his mansion. So, in some ways, Batman in this film is presented perfectly in character, but also out of character at other points. Another character who I feel is very out of character in this movie is Alfred. After everything they've been through, I find it hard to believe that Alfred would leave Bruce. Now, the film tries to justify this through Alfred suggesting that
I won't bury you. I've buried enough members of the Wayne family.
You leave me?
You see only one end to your journey. Leaving is all I have to make you understand.
But for me, this doesn't work very well. Alfred would bury Bruce, but he'd never want it to come to that, and he'd ensure that he's there to do everything in his power to stop that from happening. Surely he knows he can't sway Bruce from becoming Batman again. So for me, this subplot just doesn't work. I think if the plot needed to push Alfred out of the way so that everything else can go as the film does, it would have maybe worked better if it were Bruce who pushed away Alfred for trying to maintain the Bruce side of Batman. This way you could have kept the part in which Alfred reveals the truth about Rachel having moved on before her death, and given Bruce the space to finally move on from Rachel, first falling for Miranda Tate and later Selina Kyle. So as it stands, I don't like how this film treats Alfred. However, I think with a couple of minor tweaks it could have worked much better. I think it's a shame really, because the standout element of both Begins and Dark Knight, but mainly Begins, was the dynamic between Bruce and Alfred. And I feel that this film sort of taints that legacy in a way, and taints the history between them. Now, here's a hot take, but I actually love this version of Bane. Tom Hardy has an intensity in his performance that I adore, and as much as we all love to mock that voice, you cannot deny it's absolutely iconic and so quotable.
Oh, yes, I was wondering what would break first, your spirit or your body. It's just so easy to do the Bane voice, isn't it? Oh, you think darkness in your eye. You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it.
In a world where silly voices are treated as serious,
Where's the trigger? Where is it? You never give it to an ordinary citizen. Where is it? Where's the trigger? Where is it? Where is it?
it really doesn't bother me that much. A lot of people criticise this version of Bane for ultimately being a henchman and a pawn in the League of Assassins plan. However, Despite the fact that Bane isn't working alone or behind the whole plot, I would still argue that he is presented as a master tactician, much like comic book Bane is. This Bane still has to conduct heists, and it's him and his team that do all the work, partnering up with John Daggett to help take away Wayne Enterprises from Bruce, capturing Dr. Pavel at the start of the film, and planting all the explosives and planning Gotham's takeover. Bane has a strong presence that bleeds off the screen, and he has truly become one of the most iconic and recognizable Batman villains as a result of this film. I even argue one of the most iconic cinema villains of all time. So whilst he doesn't have the venom of the comic book version, and whilst his backstory is retooled for this film, I still think it's a great version of the character, even if he is very hyperbolized and over the top. On the note of villains, the return to the League of Assassins ties up the trilogy brilliantly, in my opinion. This version of Bruce trained under them and became Batman as a result of them, with the first villain he faces being Ra's al Ghul. So for me, it's fitting that if this version of Batman is to have an ending, for the narrative to come full circle by bringing back the League is something that I find very satisfying. And I personally like the Talia al Ghul twist. I watched the movie for the first time as a kid, so for me it genuinely was a surprise. And yes, now I'm older, it's pretty predictable that Miranda Tate isn't who she seems. But nevertheless, I think it works. I think that Marion Cotillard does a great job, right up until her death scene.
Prepare yourselves. My father's work is done.
Yeah, not the best day in the office there. Another controversial character is John Blake, aka Not Robin. I really like this character as an original character, so for me, the Robin name reveal at the end doesn't really work. But then again, he isn't really Robin, and I've always felt it was more of an Easter egg tease than anything else. Much like this movie's
They asked me if he saw any giant alligators.
tease was. Blake goes on an interesting journey working alongside Gordon, and the team up of those two works really well. Despite not liking the fact that Batman had retired by the opening of this film, I do think the scene in which Blake inspires Bruce to pick up the mantle again is very well done, and clearly reveals enough about the character for John Blake to feel fleshed out. Moreover, I really like Anne Hathaway in the role of Catwoman. Michelle Pfeiffer is an incredibly tough act to follow in that role, and Zoe Kravitz, who's since succeeded Hathaway, gave an excellent performance of the character too. So I often feel that as a result of these two other stellar performances of the character, Anne's is often sidelined, which in my opinion is a shame, because she brings all the character traits needed to the table for Catwoman to feel like Catwoman. She's slinky,
Oops. Nobody told me it was uncrackable.
clever,
My friend's outside, just hit send.
And even in that dress, no one's gonna miss you.
No. But my friend over there? Every cop in the city's missing him.
It's cute. But they're not gonna be looking in a place like this.
I don't know. You did just use his cell phone.
seductive, but she's also got a humanity to her, and we really see Selina grow and change in this film, from wanting to live in Bane's post-revolution Gotham to wanting to save the city. Her chemistry is on point with Christian Bale's Batman, and in my opinion, for the first time in the whole trilogy, we have a love interest that actually feels like a good fit for this version of Batman. Some of the scenes between them are my favourite moments in the movie, with the standout one for me being
Come with me. Save yourself. You don't owe these people anymore. You've given them everything.
Not everything. Not yet.
which demonstrates Selina's last attempt to convince Bruce not to be selfless for once. But Batman cannot not try to save his city, and she's so inspired by this that she too decides to come back and join the fight. So for me, This is a great version of Catwoman, and I hope that Anne Hathaway's portrayal garners more appreciation in the future. As with any of the movies in this trilogy, Gary Oldman as Gordon and Morgan Freeman as Lucius always bring their A game, delivering charismatic and incredibly likable characters into the films. As much as I love Jeffrey Wright as the new Gordon in Matt Reeves' The Batman, Gary Oldman will likely always be my favourite Gordon. He was the first one I ever saw, and his performance is excellent. He feels like a real character and does an excellent job of playing an ordinary man in a crazy world of capes and clowns. And Morgan Freeman is, and always will be, the greatest of all time. For me, the biggest issues I have with this film are some of the weird plot holes in this narrative. I think some people's issues stem from the film not always showcasing clearly the length of time it takes Bruce to recover from his back injury. The bomb from activation has a 5-month countdown, and Bruce returns a couple of days before it goes off. So from injury to being back as Batman, Bruce is recovering for 5 months. But the only indication of this is a couple of easy to miss lines, and the fact that Gotham is clearly winter by the final act, although it wasn't super clear what time of year it was at the start of the film either. But I will admit the way Bruce is healed seems a bit silly. I don't claim to be a spinal injury expert, but is this how it's done?
There's a vertebra protruding from your back. It has to be put back. Stay like this until you stand.
A lot of people have an issue with Bane flying Bruce all the way out to the pit before flying himself back to take over Gotham, saying this is a waste of time and silly. And I actually personally disagree. Given how the pit formed Bane and ultimately Talia and Raz indirectly into the way they were, means that in a sense, if they wanted to punish Bruce for the murder of Ra's, putting him in the hell they endured and making him watch his city fall apart, rather than just killing him, makes sense. And Talia reinforces this idea at the end too.
Don't kill him. I want him to feel the heat. Feel the fire of 12 million souls. You failed.
I was no longer under her control, Bane starts to have other ideas.
We both know that I have to kill you now. You'll just have to imagine the fire.
So for me, this works. I think the only tweak that would have been worthwhile would be have some explanation as to how Bruce got from the pit to Gotham again. I think by having that in there, it would have just made the plot make more sense. Another negative, and I do agree with this, is the fight scenes. Now, this is actually an issue throughout the trilogy, but it's most prevalent and noticeable in Rises, because the camera is out wider and the fighting plays more of a role in the plot than it does in The Dark Knight, for example. Part of this issue is the fighting style itself, and it doesn't really suit Batman too well. This is explained brilliantly by one of the best, but sadly little known action stars of today, Scott Adkins, although you may barely recognise him from John Wick 4 as Killer.
It was framed nicely, brilliant. But then when somebody started fighting, the wrong angles, man. The wrong angles. Nolan's a great filmmaker, but he got it wrong. Batman is covered in Kevlar. And yet in the Nolan movies, he's fighting with Casey, which is this very defensive martial art. Batman's covered in Kevlar, man. He should just be going through, smashing through people. And that's exactly what he did with the Zack Snyder films, which, I prefer the Nolan movies, but the way Batman fought in the Snyder movies was perfect.
I'm not sure how much of the poor fight scenes were down to the choreography, the time they had to shoot, or whether Bale's batsuit was particularly clunky to move in, but they really don't work for me. And when we watch Batman and Bane fight, we're expected to see two martial arts masters go toe-to-toe with one another, and these wide swings for punches and not a lot else don't showcase that very well. The final element to touch on is the ending. Now, for some fans, the idea of Batman being alive and well but retiring seems implausible, because Batman is who Bruce Wayne is, ever since the night his parents were murdered in front of him. But this version of Batman is finally able to move on from being Batman. He fulfilled Alfred's fantasy of,
It's 7 years I waited, hoping that you wouldn't come back. Every year, I took a holiday. I went to Florence. There's this cafe on the banks of the Arno. Every fine evening, I'd sit there and order a Fernet Branca. I had this fantasy that I would look across the tables and I'd see you there with a wife, maybe a couple of kids. You wouldn't say anything to me, nor me to you. But we both know that you'd made it, that you were happy.
and he's able to move on from the traumas of his past. It's a happy ending for the Batman character, and perhaps the best happy ending you could devise for Batman. But I think the issue for some is that Batman can't have a happy ending because he can never move on. And to some extent, I do agree with that. But I think for this ultra realistic, grounded version of Batman that isn't always a representative of the comic book Batman, this does work. And I feel it wraps up the trilogy in a nice, neat way. And plus, as he is alive and well with Selina, I'm sure if things ever did go south and either Blake or Gotham needed his help, I'm sure he'd re-emerge as Batman. But for me, the ending works for what it is, a conclusion to a very specific version of Batman, and one that feels very satisfying and leaves you feeling happy at the end of the film. There's something quite reassuring about the fact that in the end, he made it, and he found a happy life for himself. And that was my take on The Dark Knight Rises. It's certainly not a perfect film, but to me it's still a great movie and an enjoyable watch for many Batman fans. As always, thank you so much for your time if you've made it this far. I hope you have an amazing day. Goodbye.